Hello and welcome to the QA Therapy podcast. Are you looking to improve your overall testing and quality practices? My name is Sergio Freire and I'm a solution architect and a testing advocate at Xray.
And my name is Cristiano Cunha, and I'm also a solution architect and test advocate. And we'll be your hosts and QA therapists throughout this series. In this podcast, we're going to tackle some of the most common testing and quality challenges that we all face in our teams. So if this sounds good to you, keep on listening. We see increased complexity in the systems being built nowadays, while at the same time, pressure to release more often. We use automation to assist us, but even so, it may not be enough. We still need to decide the tests we want to perform or automate and include it in our pipelines. Are there any techniques that can help? To assist us with this topic, we have Joel with us that will help us on finding more about this. But before welcoming him, let's see what actually brings us here. Let's see what kind of symptoms you may be feeling that has brought you to listen to this podcast. So ask yourself, do you feel a bit lost whenever trying to decide what tests to perform? How to get some useful test ideas? Or is your system so complex that you feel it will take forever to test all the possible combinations? Or even if you can depict all possible combinations for a certain scenario, is there a subset that can maximize value? Or even are there any techniques that help us testing under certain situations? Or even how to make sure that certain combinations of variables are tested?
All these are symptoms that we may not be aware of all the different testing techniques that exist and that we can actually use and the applicable scenarios for them. Let's dive a bit into this topic. And today we have here with us Joel Oliveira, our expert QA therapist, to assist on diagnosis and prescription on the symptoms related to testing techniques. Joel has a long background into the testing space and actually in the space, and he has organized testing Portugal for several years. And he's a frequent speaker on conferences and meetups everywhere around the world. Nowadays, he works at Celfocus, where he's a senior QA manager. Welcome, Joel. Are you feeling comfortable on our QA therapy couch?
Yeah, for sure. And Sergio and Christian, thanks for inviting me for this. Okay, it's my pleasure.
Great. So let's get the show started. And I know I knew you for several years as well. And uh, our, let's say, main topic here is about this testing techniques. What is a testing technique?
Well, that's a very good question, and I try to prepare myself for today, of course. And I look for the definition. So a procedure used to define test conditions, design test case, and specify test data. But myself, I like to look for a testing technique from a more broader perspective. Okay, so for me, it's a way of doing something, of a way of doing a specific task. And of course, usually this involves some techniques, and it's not just, some skills, and it's not just to do it, but to do it in an efficient way. Okay, so you can see this as a skillful or efficient way of doing or achieving a specific goal.
Yeah, and so now that we know what's a testing technique, can you enumerate some of them? Because maybe some of our um, listeners have heard about them, but they don't identify them as testing techniques.
Yeah. Yeah, I can talk about specific techniques, but I will prefer at this stage, at least for now, to talk more about groups of techniques. Okay, so some classification of techniques, at least the most known ones. And if I talk about black box testing, white box testing, everyone will, at least hopefully this will ring a bell for everyone saying, oh, I know that. Of course, black box testing or white box testing is not a technique itself, but you can see this as a group of testing techniques, okay? So for example, when we are talking about black box testing, we can talk about equivalent partition, boundary value analysis, or BV8, decision tables, set decisions. Those are the most, let's say, the names that will recall something for the ones at least that did the foundation or the ISTQ training. But the most common one, it's actually the use case, right? Or the test case. Everyone is writing test case, so that's the most common technique for the black box group. On white box, I will say the name of the category is common. The techniques themselves, they are not so commonly used, at least, like a statement or decision testing and coverage. But of course, you have other types of techniques, other groups, probably some groups that you will not recall as a group of testing techniques, like, for example, experience-based or even agile testing techniques or test automation techniques. Okay, so later on, if you want, we can dive a little bit more into these different types of categories.
Great. So you mentioned already a few of them. Let's pick this. I remember when I heard about BVA.
BVA.
And sorry for our listeners, because here in Portugal, sometimes we mix the B's with the V's. But BVA, boundary value analysis. Let's for example, if we can pick one such as boundary value analysis, if you can use that to explain a bit more
what
about
the technique is?
it in practice. Yeah.
Okay.
Using that.
Can I choose a different one, if you allow me?
For
yeah,
sure.
Okay. Because I think it will be easier to explain the technique itself. Okay. And why? Because BVA requires a little bit more of knowledge. Okay. But in our days, with everyone moving to agile, this agile way of doing things, this new way that will solve all the problems, everyone is doing exploratory testing, right? ET for the friends, as I call it. Okay. And what I realized, what I learned is that most of the testers that are doing exploratory testing, actually, they are not doing it, or at least they are not using the technique as it is supposed to be. Okay. And for me, that's the easiest way to explain using the name or using the technique. Okay. When you are using exploratory testing, and I ask for the tester, okay, how long is your testing session? They say, oh, we do that for days, or doing exploratory testing. And that's a very good insight that you are not using the technique. You are just using the name. Okay, so for the technique, and remember what I said before, I see the technique as an efficient way of achieving something. Okay, so exploratory testing implies that you have a time box, and implies that during that time box, your testing activities are not interrupted. So you cannot do that for several days, not even several hours. So maximum that you will have, it's 1 hour or 2 hours where you will be 100% focused on this testing activity. So comparing these, for example, with a test case, right? The most typical one. You finish the test case execution when you run all the test case, and hopefully all the test cases are green, right? So you passed all of them. With exploratory testing, you finish when the time finish, right? So that's the end condition. So applying the technique without all these details, it's actually not applying the technique. You need to understand the technique. You need to have this practice to be able to apply it correctly and to be able to achieve the added value of the technique. Okay, so applying or believing that you are applying the technique without knowing, it's actually not helping anyone.
Yeah, it's a good example, the exploratory testing one. Even though now we are, like you said, applying it more and more because of DevOps and everything. So now it's even more used than it was before, and rightly used. not like doing an exploratory for days or weeks just because we are validating the release.
I can share with you that I did actually several workshops around the world, specifically on testing techniques. And of course, exploratory testing was there. And on more than 20 places where I executed this training, this workshop, not even a single person was applying exploratory testing correctly. And so I think
Yeah.
that's a very good insight into this.
Yeah, it's a very good example. So you kind of already lift the veil here about the techniques, and my question here was more, how can those techniques help us save money and address more relevant risks?
Okay. I believe that having the techniques or not, it's like comparing, for example, a craftsman or a amateur, someone that is just doing, the traditional point and click, right? That was quite useful, quite usual or quite common in the 10, 20 years ago when QA or software testing was not seen as an added value. They were seeing just the guys that unfortunately cannot do anything else and they are just good using the mouse and doing point and click, right? Having this knowledge, having these test techniques, it's what makes the difference, right? It's what I call a professional tester, not just someone that is doing tests. Okay, so bringing the value on being a professional tester, it's quite easy to explain. And of course, it saves money, but and reduce the risk. Just becoming more efficient, right? If you are more efficient on what you are doing, if you are doing more using less effort, less time, or if you are increasing your coverage, or if you are reducing the risk, and that's actually the focus on the test techniques, right? That's where they can help you, and I can give you some specific examples later on. That's for me. It's where the money is. It's where the value is.
Yeah, I see the importance of knowing the techniques, but one thing that you said is also important. That is, more than knowing the techniques, it's know when to apply those techniques, right? Because you have to understand those, understand which one of them will be more useful for your use case, for your application, for your company. So that's really, but you need to know them all to know which one you can use. Yeah.
Yeah, correct. One of the concepts that I tend to use, it's the concept of a tool set. Okay, and for the ones that already saw me talking in several conferences, I always talk about the hammer, right? The hammer, it's probably the most used tool. Everyone knows how to use the hammer. And the hammer can be a template that you use in your previous project. It can be a test technique that you always use. So that's your go-to, that's your hammer. Like, for example, test case, right? Everyone knows how to write a test case. It's a technique that you can feel comfortable with. So we always go for the test case. Sometimes without even challenging ourselves, if there is a better test technique that can help us to achieve the same results in a more efficient way or to achieve better results. For example, if we are testing a flow, right? You can use state diagram. And probably that will increase your coverage and it will reduce the risk, making sure that you are not forgetting any specific transition or any specific state. Instead of just looking for the hammer, we should look to our tool set, understand all these tools, all these techniques that we have in our tool set, and understand what is the best one for that specific need. Or it could be that it's not just one, but a combination of multiple test techniques.
Joel, I think you already kind of answered this, but picking that coverage example that you mentioned, are there techniques that are more tailored to in order to improve coverage and if so, what kind of coverage? Because there's also this kind of mix up in sometimes people are talking about different kinds of coverage.
Yeah.
Are there any techniques in order to improve specific kinds of coverage?
Yeah, for example, when we are talking about white box testing, like statement and decision testing coverage, of course, those techniques are specifically for coverage, and they will help to achieve a specific coverage level, right, or percentage. But even the other techniques can also help you to increase the coverage. And by increasing the coverage, I mean to avoid forgetting specific case. Okay, not just edge case. For example, let's go for the most simple one, test case. Right, when we are talking about test case, just using negative and positive test case that can increase the coverage, right? So it's a very simple one. When we are talking about combinations, for example, right, combinatory testing, just applying the technique will also ensure that you are not forgetting any combination. But by the other side, you also have the example where the number of combinations is so high that you will never test everything, right? And there's another techniques can be used, like for example, pairwise testing, where you can optimize. In this case, I will say that it looks like you are not increasing the coverage because actually pairwise reduces the coverage. Okay, so you will not have all the combinations, but it increases at least the number of combinations that you are able to execute. Okay, there is no point on having 1,000 different combinations if you know that you will not execute them all, right? In the end of the day, we are humans, right? So if you need to execute the same test 1,000 times with the same, just with different combinations on the parameters, halfway through, if not before, you will just give up and say, I did 10, 20, 100 test cases and they all work. So I just passed everything green and, let's call it a day, right? We will not execute 100 or 1,000 test cases just with different combinations. So being more efficient, it's where these different techniques can help. Okay?
Yeah, but as we see, we have a lot of techniques around. So how can someone that do not know techniques yet and now is coming to this new world and knowing that you have all of these techniques, how can they choose one over another for a specific case?
Well, there is no silver bullet, right? So first you need to learn. That's the first step. You need to learn all these different techniques. You need to learn the theory about them, the advantage, disadvantage, when they apply, when they don't apply. So you need to know them, okay? And the second step is practice. So it's not just the
experience.
exactly. You cannot just learn a technique reading a book. Right? You need to exercise yourself. You need to practice it. You need to bring it to the real world. And the third step is to repeat all over again. Okay, so you need to keep learning and you need to keep practice. That's the only way to improve. It's a closed cycle. And then with this experience, it will come also let's say the techniques that you will need to apply, or it will be easier for you to understand in each different situation what will be the right technique to apply. Of course, you can apply or you can have some criteria for the different techniques. For example, if you have a technique that is based on experience, and if you don't have an experienced team, probably you should not choose those type of techniques, right? If you are not a technical tester, probably you should not go with white box testing techniques, right? Because they are much more technical and close to the code. So you need really to be able to understand the techniques, all the techniques that you can have on your test set, and then depending on your context, okay? Because that's really important. Your context, you need to be able to identify the right techniques. Okay, and let me stress this again. Context is quite important, and there is no silver bullet that you can just use saying, okay, for this project, this is the right technique to use.
Joel, would you say that are part of the techniques, are there techniques that are more, let's say, tailored for test automation than others?
Yeah, for sure. Some of them are more applicable for test automation. For example, like data-driven testing or keyword-driven. They are more feasible or adjusted for test automation, right? TDD, BDD, ATDD, all these 3 or 4 letters type of techniques, they are also more adjusted for test automation or for a scenario where you are doing test automation. But for example, BDD or behavior-driven development. So of course, it's a test automation technique, or you can see that as a test automation technique from a broader sense, a broader point of view. But you can use at least partially this technique. For example, you can write manual test case using Gherkin, even without the test automation part, right? So you can use part of this technique at least for manual testing, even if it's a test technique that is mostly focused on test automation. Another example, data-driven testing, for example. Okay. And it's one of my favorite techniques together with pairwise testing. So data-driven testing, everyone thinks on data-driven testing for test automation. Say, oh, I'm doing test automation. I'm not doing test automation, so I cannot use data-driven testing. Wrong. Okay. Even when you are doing a simple login test, and it's a manual test, right? And you need to write all these test cases for the positive and negative scenarios and with different inputs. You don't need to write them all. Right? You just need to use a proper test management tool that allows you to use this technique even for manual testing. Okay, and then during the execution time, if it's a proper tool, then it will explode all these different combinations based on your test data. So you will have the different executions with the same script, but different inputs, different expected outputs. Okay, so it's quite useful, and you think carefully on this, you spend more time on writing than on the execution. And that's even more valid on the manual testing, right? We spend a lot of time writing specifications, writing test case. If you can save time there and you can apply the right techniques, that's a huge improvement on your testing efforts.
Yeah, so basically we can adapt some of the techniques to be used in different contexts in different ways.
For sure.
Yeah, makes sense. And are there any misconceptions around testing techniques? Such, do you have like one size fits all kind of technique, or do you think that we can mix match a lot of techniques and to reach an outcome? So what's your experience on this?
Yes, several ones. So, well, the first one we just talked about it, right? So some techniques are just applicable for manual testing, or some techniques are just applicable for test automation, right? Like that. That's the most common one. The second one, the biggest one, I will say, it's most probably the I need a very expensive tool to apply a technique. Okay. Or I don't have time to apply the technique. That's also a common one. So having this or applying these techniques, they don't require expensive tools or complex tools, and they will not require more effort. Actually, they will save you some effort. So that's the I will say the misconception or the two misconceptions that I see more, and it always goes to my mind that drawing where you will see a team pushing something with a square wheel, right? Trying to push a car with a square wheel, and then someone said, "Oh, I have this round wheel, and it will save you some time." And I say, "Oh no, I'm too busy now. We don't have time for any improvements.
Can change
right?
it.
We can change it now." And that's basically what I see with the test techniques, right? When I go to a team and say, "Guys, there is a better way of doing it, right? And they say, oh, yes, but I don't have time now. Okay, so that's the big misconception.
Joel, you mentioned already a bit about combinatorial testing, and I remember that you mentioned pairwise testing, and I don't think pairwise testing is really an interesting thing. Uh, would it be a good fit to use with, let's say, if you could give an example?
Examples. Well, I can give you two different examples. Okay, one, it's quite frequent ones in nowadays where you'll need to test different versions or with different versions of the software or different versions of the browser or different versions of the operating system, right? When you need to test desktop, mobile, and in mobile you have iOS, you have Android, and then you can explode these with different versions. So you can use data-driven testing to optimize these combinations. Okay, so pairwise testing, for the ones that don't know it, it will not give you all the different combinations, but it's what they call all pairs. So it will give all the pairs of all the different values, all the different parameters that you can use for the testing. It's an optimized, you can see this as an optimized set of combinations. Okay, and it's quite useful from this perspective. And I call out this example with the browsers or with the operating systems and the device, because it's quite common still in our days when you go to a customer and say, oh, we want you to test all everything, right? All the different browsers, all the different combinations, desktop, mobile, iOS, Android. And when you go to Android, then it explodes, right? And if you have different countries, then the device in multiple countries are also different. So it's impossible. So you need to have a technique that will be able that will help you to reduce this scope, and something that you can explain to the customer. Okay. Of course, you can use different techniques. You can go with risk-based testing. You can go with a simple 80-20, the Pareto analysis, right, where you will have 20% of the device that cover 80% of the market, or you can also use pairwise testing for these. Okay, this is one example, one scenario where I think pairwise testing can be quite useful. The other one, it's whenever you have a form, okay, a form with different parameters, and I will say that covers almost
like the IRS.
Yeah, for example, okay, and I will say that covers, let's use it 80-20, right? 80% of our test case use these different types of forms and inputs that you need to fill in with different parameters. And it could be a numeric input, it can be a drop list if you are under 80, if you are under 20 or over 20. So you need to have all these different combinations, right? And pairwise, it's quite useful for that because it helps you to understand all the different combinations. Recently, I've reported a defect on LinkedIn. I created a post because I was just playing with the AC on my car, and actually one of the combinations was not available. So these ACs with multiple zones, right? You have the driver and you have the passenger seat, and I was able to switch both of them with different values, but for the passenger, one of the values was missing. Okay, and I asked the community, okay, how can we avoid these kind of defects? And some of guys, of course, they said exploratory testing, because exploratory testing is everywhere and solves all the problems. To find these kind of problems with exploratory testing, it will not be easy. You need to be basically lucky to try that combination, right? And to understand, oh, this combination is not available. So you need something a little bit more structured that will, a different technique that will give you different combinations. And with these type of techniques, then you will be able to see that we have a defect there. And it's valid if you tell me, well, pairwise could give you a combination that will not exercise that defect. It's true, it's valid. Okay, so quality and software testing is also is always this balance, this equilibrium, right? This between quality and the cost, right? If you have more money, more time, you can test everything or almost everything. But you need to understand your context, and time and money, it's always a limitation that you have. So probably pairwise will help on this.
Joel, let me step back for a bit, and because you mentioned also exploratory testing earlier and now, and well, some people mention exploratory testing more as an approach. Some highlight it as a technique, as you were mentioning. What's your take? Why do you highlight it more like a technique um, than, for example, than an approach?
Yeah, I know that in our days we tend to focus a lot, and I see lots of the discussions about the sometimes about the English words, or if it's a method, if it's a technique, if it's what is manual testing, what is automation. I tend to not get into that discussion. For me, I see it as another tool in my toolbox, another tool that I can use to improve my testing efforts. Okay, something that will help me to be more efficient on my testing activities. And for me, that's a technique.
Something that is part of your, let's say, testing tool belt.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so it's something that requires skills. Okay, I need to have a specific set of skills to use this, and it's a way of doing things. Okay, that's for me the definition of a technique.
And do you see any new techniques appearing? Any new things that you are looking forward to, or that are promising, or you don't see any new techniques appearing for a while? What do you
Um,
think about?
yeah, well, I'm quite keen on AI, right? I think we are all expecting to see something coming out from AI. If it will come out or not, we don't know yet. But that's what I'm expecting. Okay, so I'm expecting that together with AI, we will be able to improve our testing efforts. And it could be the same approach that we are already using with all these techniques, right? We are not just using one single technique. We are using a mixture of techniques. So for example, we can use data-driven testing together with keyword-driven, or together with pairwise, or all the three techniques together. So we don't need to use just one technique or the other. What I'm expecting to see, it's something that comes out from AI and that will leverage on the techniques that already exist today, but improve them somehow, okay, making them more
Yeah,
efficient.
that's a tricky one, because there's a way that AI may need less smart people to use them, because the AI will do the intelligent part of it. So we may be in a future where testers will not even need to know these techniques, because AI will apply and combine those for
Yeah,
them
yeah,
and give them results. I hope not, because at least we will need to understand what's behind it. But yeah, AI, it's a big
yeah.
thing that we have
We,
around.
we're talking about experience-based testing, right? And when we're talking about
Yeah.
experience-based testing, I actually didn't talk about the different techniques, but for example, we have error guessing or checklist-based. Okay, and error guessing is something where you can apply the experience, and it can be looking, for example, for patterns, right? You can look for a historical database with errors, try to identify patterns, and then look for the same exact patterns on a new version of the system. And AI, it's very good. It's actually where it is good. It's identifying patterns, right? So it could
Exactly.
be
Yeah.
really a way where
And
AI
parsing
can
huge
improve
amount
it.
of
Yeah,
information.
exactly.
Yeah. So we are reaching the end of the episode. So where can we learn more about these testing techniques? Do you have any source that you can share?
Yeah. Well, in our days, you have multiple sources, right? It's more about finding the reliable source and not so
Yeah.
much about finding a source. So I always like to refer to the ISTQB. For me, that's a reliable source where you can look for the techniques, and then of course you need to learn how to use them. Okay, and for that, my personal advice it's to look for specific workshops. Okay, to try to learn with other testers with experience. Look for specific workshops on the specific techniques. I will recommend that more than just looking for Udemy or YouTube videos, things like these.
Mhm.
That can point you on the right direction, but can also point you into the wrong direction on the techniques. I already saw several examples of that. So at least for now, I think it will be it's still more reliable, trustful to go and try to learn with someone that has a track record on the field.
Yeah, and try it on
Yeah,
your work
yeah, for
also,
sure.
and compare. What helped me also was compared with a testing technique and without, like I was used to do, and see what was the outcome. If I save time, if not, what are the combinations that I will do without technique or not. It helps, but it's an investment of time that you need to do also.
I remember that, in fact, you putting our hands and learning with someone from the field is really, really important. That's when I learned a bit more about model-based testing, and I think it's something that we need to put our hands on in order to exercise uh, and also ask, let's say, for advices, because easily you get stuck whenever you are trying to implement, let's say, a test technique, for example, and you need to ask advice from someone that is there. So thank you, Joel, for being here with us today. It was a pleasure. We learned so much about uh, the different testing techniques and some benefits that they can bring to teams in order to test more efficiently and with better outcomes. Thank you.
Right. Okay, Serge, thank you. Thanks, Christiane, also for this time. As I said before, it was my pleasure, and hopefully see you next time around the world. Thank you.
Thanks.
Before ending our episode, it's time for some vitamins. We know that in general, they are good for our health. In this case, we will be talking about vitamin X, where X stands for Xray. First, Xray supports data-driven testing. That gives you the possibility of defining the test data combinations that you want to check. You may define data sets with multiple parameters, define their values, and then let Xray make the combinations for you. And you can do this at different levels. But Xray Enterprise also supports more advanced scenarios. Whenever your goal is to provide a high level of coverage with a very limited number of test cases, with Xray Enterprise, you can generate optimized test scenarios by using state-of-the-art pairwise and the other related algorithms. This means better use of your time and of your infrastructure. Test more and what matters with less effort. In case you opt for state transition testing as a technique, Xray also provides integration with well-known module-based testing tools, open source and commercial, and the documentation provides tutorials showcasing this integration.
And we have reached the end of our episode. And in this episode, we have learned that testing is not an impossible task, even though the number of possible testing scenarios is infinite. But whenever trying to decide the tests to perform, we can make use of well known testing techniques to come up with different test scenarios. Testing techniques can help us increase coverage, reduce risk, and in the end, deal with the fact that we are and will always be limited by human resources, infrastructure, and timing constraints. Learning and trying different techniques is key to improve our testing skills and, in the end, make sure we depict the problems that matter so we can address them on time. So, see you in our next therapy session. Happy testing!
Happy testing!